The sun hadn't even fully broken through the horizon when João Veredas felt the first crack of the day pierce his back. It was always like this. Even before the rooster crowed, the world already seemed too heavy for one man alone. But João carried this weight as one carries a secret, silently, firmly, almost as if the burden were part of his own body. On that particular dawn, however, there was something different in the air. An almost imperceptible detail that hinted his life was about to change. But it wasn't time to reveal anything yet. What matters for now is understanding who this man was, whom many considered ordinary, but who, in truth, hid a rare strength. The sky was still painted a timid orange when he opened the old gate, creaking in the hot wind. Cracked hands, skin marked by years of work, slow but firm steps. João was the very definition of resilience. And yet, no one seemed to notice. The countryside knew his every footprint, every sigh, every thought lost in the silence of Seu Afonso Medeiros' farm, the boss who saw little and demanded much. João walked among the cattle as one walks among old friends. He touched the animals' backs with a delicacy that contrasted with his body, weathered by time. This contrast created a magnetic, almost poetic aura, as if the man had been born to save what no one else perceived. He was the living archetype of the humble hero, the one who fights giant battles while the world merely observes, oblivious to the hidden greatness. Even tired, even without rest, he always found a way to give a little more of himself. The sun began to rise, burning the nape of anyone exposed to it. But João didn't complain. He never complained. He adjusted his leather hat, wiped the sweat with the back of his hand, and continued on. The work was heavy, hard, repetitive, but it carried an almost sacred meaning for him. It was his way of existing, of proving to himself that he still had value, and deep down perhaps he hoped that someone would realize it someday. As he rounded up the wildest heifers, his thoughts drifted to a deeper place, perhaps the memory of a past no one knew, perhaps a pain he never told anyone. It was as if something inside him was slowly breaking apart without him being able to stop it. But still he continued, because he always continued. From the large veranda of the main house, Seu Afonso observed everything from afar. His gaze was quick, almost distracted, as if the cowboy were just another piece of the farm, a useful piece, but replaceable. João knew this, and yet he gave his best. There were days when Seu Afonso didn't even remember to say thank you, others when he complained about things that didn't make sense. And João, without raising his voice, accepted it, with humility, with an almost painful patience. Ultimately, the audience can feel it. It wasn't just work, it was dedication, it was soul. The farm might have belonged to the boss, but the heart of that place beat to the rhythm of João Veredas' worn-out boots. And it is precisely here that the story begins to take on a different weight, an emotional weight, invisible, but one that is already foreshadowed. Because on that day, something was about to happen. Something that would shake the very essence of everything that João held up with such devotion. And unbeknownst to him, Seu Afonso was just a few steps away from discovering the true value of the man he had never truly seen. But that's something yet to come. And as João made his way through the corral, guiding the cattle with that calmness that only those who know the soul of animals can possess, a strange feeling tightened his chest. He took a deep breath, trying to push away the weight that had been growing inside him for weeks. Something needed to change, and he knew it. Perhaps it was the accumulated fatigue. Perhaps it was the silence of the pain he never shared with anyone. Perhaps it was simply the fact that no matter how much he gave his all, it seemed that no one saw. No one. Except the viewer who now follows this story and feels each word as if treading on the same dust that covers João's boots. The sound of his spurs echoed faintly as he walked to the shade of a wildflower tree to catch his breath. Sweat dripped, mingled with thoughts he would never speak aloud. It was hard to admit, but the truth is that even the strongest men, those who carry the world on their shoulders without complaint, also break down inside. And that's precisely where the tragic beauty of this story lies. The invisible hero who holds everything together, but who almost never receives the bare minimum: recognition. As João adjusted the saddle on the horse's back, he looked around and realized that despite everything he was doing, the farm seemed to continue on, oblivious to his silent struggle. It seemed so, but not for long, because what was coming next would turn this world upside down. And before we continue, before we delve into the deeper parts of this plot that will still affect many people, let me ask something important of you who are here following this exciting story. If you also believe that no one deserves to carry the weight of the world alone, if you also feel that many good people are only valued when they are no longer around, then leave your like now. This shows that you want to continue hearing stories that truly touch the heart. Comment below, "I want change," if you believe that people like João Veredas deserve to be seen, heard, and recognized. Let's create a space where stories like his don't go unnoticed. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe now, because what comes next is intense, it's real, it's human, and you won't want to miss what's about to happen. João doesn't know it yet, but fate is preparing the moment when his life will take an unexpected turn. And when that happens, nothing will ever be the same again. Seu Afonso Medeiros appeared on the veranda as he did every day, with that air of a property owner who believes he sees everything, when in reality he sees nothing but his own shadow. The morning light struck his face, creating a harsh contrast between the sun's glare and his closed, almost cold expression, which seemed permanent. He was a man trapped within a world he himself had built, a world where power was worth more than gratitude and where arrogance was confused with authority. As he watched the activity on the farm, he held his coffee cup as if he held the very destiny of everyone there. But unlike João Veredas, who carried the weight of the world in his calloused hands, Seu Afonso carried only the weight of his own pride. His gaze drifted down to the corral. He saw João working alone. He saw the cows obediently following. He saw the dust rising. But he saw nothing of the silent struggle behind that scene. It was like looking at a river and not perceiving the depth of its waters. The cowboy patiently herded the cattle, adjusting the animals with the same care as always, while Seu Afonso breathed deeply, as if expecting more, always more. For him, João was just a piece, a useful piece, but completely replaceable. And that's where the dark side of the boss's soul resided. His shadow, as Jung would say, that hidden part he refused to acknowledge, the part that made him incapable of seeing value in the one who truly sustained his farm. The shadow revealed itself in small actions, almost imperceptible to those who don't experience it every day. But anyone who has worked for someone like that, who has felt the injustice in their soul, knows exactly what I'm talking about. It was in the harsh silence, in the whispered demands, in the way he would pass by an employee without even saying, "Good morning." It was in the salary that was always less than it should have been, in the excuse that the month was weak, even when the cattle were fattening, even when production was increasing. It was in the terse message left on the note attached to the stable door. "Fix the pasture fence today." It was poorly done. And that hurt João. Not because it was too much work, he never complained about that, but because it was a constant daily ingratitude that seemed to slowly corrode the spirit. The boss watched from afar, but didn't really see. He didn't see when João spent extra hours in the pasture trying to save a sick calf. He didn't see when the cowboy skipped lunch to help the other pedestrians. I didn't see when he returned late at night, tired, but still willing to check on the animals one last time before going to sleep. The physical distance between the two was small, but the emotional distance was an abyss created by the pride of one and the silent humility of the other. On that particular day, Sir Afonso frowned as he watched João bend down to examine a limping calf. He didn't ask what was wrong. He showed no concern. He simply shouted from afar, "John, don't forget that you have to check the trough for lot 3 today." The voice cut through the air like a whip. João simply nodded without lifting his face, but inside, something shattered a little more. It wasn't the pressure itself. It was the way he acted, always the same way, always that lack of recognition, as if nothing he did was ever enough. And you, who are watching this story, have probably felt this pain before. That feeling of being invisible where you give the most, of being underestimated, ignored, as if what you do has no weight in anyone's life. That's why stories like this are so touching, because they are real, they are human. They are moving in a way that cuts deep into the soul. The heat intensified, the dust rose, and João continued his routine as if he carried the entire world on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Sir Afonso turned his back and went inside, unaware that he was planting, day after day, a bitter seed that would soon germinate. And that seed is going to completely transform the destiny of both of them, boss and cowboy, in a way that neither of them ever imagined. And before we move on to the next chapter of this exciting story, I want to ask something important of you who have been following along this far. If this situation revolts you, if you believe João deserves better, comment, "I would never treat someone like that." Or if you prefer, write, "Enough of this injustice." Your comment strengthens the video, increases its reach, and shows that you are with us on this journey. And of course, leave a like and subscribe, because what is about to happen will deeply affect you. Night fell over the farm with a strange, heavy silence, as if the wind itself were holding its breath. João Veredas had felt something was wrong since late afternoon, when he noticed the cattle were too restless, walking in circles, snorting, looking at the horizon as if sensing an invisible danger. Animals always knew before men, and that night their premonition was right. When the first thunderclap ripped through the sky, João was already in the pasture, alone, with only a flashlight strapped to his belt and his heart racing. The storm arrived like a blow, with gusts of wind that bent the trees and made the gate bang violently. While the other ranch hands slept and Sir Afonso rested unaware of the approaching chaos, João ran from one side to the other, trying to avert the worst. The cattle were beginning to scatter across the field, frightened, about to break through the fence and disappear into the darkness. The rain fell with such force that it seemed to want to tear the soul from the earth. And there he was, a man alone, facing a force of nature that seemed to want to devour everything. His boots sank into the mud. The thunder rumbled so close that it made his chest vibrate, and the lightning momentarily illuminated the silhouettes of animals running, lost, desperate. João shouted, whistled, and called each ox by name, because he knew them all, one by one. It was as if he carried within himself an invisible map that guided his steps, even when his eyes saw nothing but darkness and rain falling like a punishment from the sky. And he held the rope tightly, even when the wind pulled him back. It was him and his own limitations. It was him and the hidden fear he pretended not to feel. It was him and duty, that duty that hurt more than his wet body, more than the exertion of the early morning. This was the hidden proof, the battle that no one else would see, the kind of struggle that transforms a man into something greater than he imagines, but which the world unjustly insists on ignoring. At one point, a calf fell into a muddy ditch, trapped and slowly sinking. João ran, slipped, fell to his knees but got up. Half his body was already covered in mud, but he pulled the animal as if he were saving a human life, and deep down, he was. For him, every creature on that farm was part of his existence. The calf trembled and groaned, but João didn't give up. His hands, already cut by the wire and the force of the water, held on tight until finally the animal slipped out, but alive. Nobody saw, nobody would know, Meanwhile, part of the herd had already broken through the fence and was running loose across the open field. João mounted his soaked horse, which trembled with nervousness, and set off after them in the merciless rain. He no longer felt his own body. It was only instinct, courage, and a kind of ancient pain that guided him. That familiar pain of those who carry the world on their shoulders and still keep going. For hours, he gathered the cattle, guided them along the right path, prevented them from falling into the ravine, and blocked the passage by improvising with branches, logs, and sheer willpower. When everything finally calmed down, it was already dawn. The storm was receding, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the leaves and João's heavy breathing. He leaned against the fence post, exhausted, his chest burning, and looked at the still, cloudy sky. There stood the martyr, the one who loses so that others may gain, the one who gives everything, expecting nothing in return, the one who saves in silence, knowing that no one will applaud. At dawn, when João returned to the headquarters, exhausted, his clothes covered in mud and his horse weary, he found Seu Afonso standing on the porch, arms crossed. The boss didn't even realize what had happened. He didn't even notice the torn clothes, the exhausted look, the bruised hands. He simply uttered a curt phrase, like someone delivering a slap without using their hands. "John, why did you leave the fence like that? You have to look into this today." And he went in, without hearing a reply. Ingratitude fell upon John like a second storm. And you who are listening, tell me, doesn't it hurt to see this happening? Doesn't it hurt to see someone give everything for a place that doesn't see their worth? If this resonates with you, comment below, "I saw his effort," or "No one deserves to be ignored like that." Comment on these phrases because they strengthen this video and show that real and moving stories still matter. And stay with me, because what comes after tonight will change everything in João Vereda's life. The next day dawned with a heavy sun, the kind that seems to judge everything it touches. João Veredas left the stable early, his body still aching from the previous night's storm. Every muscle screamed, every scratch burned like fire, but the greatest pain wasn't in his body, it was in his heart. It was a silent, accumulated, stubborn pain that had been growing for years, and that morning seemed to have reached its limit. As he adjusted the horse's harness, João felt a tightening in his chest. It wasn't just tiredness. It was a kind of emptiness that no rest could resolve, an emptiness born when someone gives everything and receives nothing. He thought of Seu Afonso's harsh words, his indifference, the lack of a grateful look. He thought of how many times he had saved the herd, how many times he had built the farm practically single-handedly, and yet he was treated as if he were a burden, a shadow, a disposable detail in the machinery of that place. And something inside him broke. The sun had barely risen when he walked to the tall pasture, that corner of the farm where few went. There, the wind blew stronger, and the silence seemed to understand who was suffering. João leaned against the fence post, took off his hat, and ran his hand over his face, feeling the marks of dried mud, sweat, and a few tears he would never admit to having shed. His face looked older that morning, as if the storm had ripped years from within him. But it wasn't just the last few hours that weighed heavily. It was a lifetime of silence, of selflessness, of humility that no one recognized. The image of the cattle running the previous night came back to his mind, and with it the thought that wounded him more than any lightning bolt. No one knew what he had done. The horse neighed weakly behind him, as if sensing its owner's pain. João ran his hand through the animal's mane and smiled sadly, resignedly. This was more than just tiredness. It was an inner rupture, as if the time had finally come to admit that he couldn't go on anymore. He took a deep breath, looked one last time at that field he knew better than his own memories, and then made a decision that had been silently maturing within him: to leave. It wouldn't be a scandal. It wouldn't be an apology, nor a cry of revolt. João wasn't that kind of man. His courage was always discreet, silent, intimate, and that's exactly how he decided to leave. Before returning to the headquarters, he walked to the old gate that separated the road from the farm. A simple gate, marked by time, but which, for him, carried history. It was there that he passed every day at dawn, there that he dreamed of better days, there that he swallowed too many sorrows. João took off his hat, the one that had accompanied him through so many storms, so much heat, so many invisible struggles, and hung it on top of the gate. It was a symbolic gesture. It was the end of an era. It was a silent way of saying, I gave everything I had, and there's nothing left to give. He took no suitcase, no souvenir, nothing but the clothes on his back and a broken heart. He walked slowly down the dirt road, like someone saying goodbye to an old friend, knowing he might never return. Hours later, when the sun was already blazing, Seu Afonso left the veranda to check on the activity on the farm. As always, he quickly looked for João, hoping to see him down there in the corral, working as he did every day, without rest, without pause, without fail. But the corral was empty. John's shadow was not there. The farmhands were talking amongst themselves, confused, saying that no one had seen the cowboy since early morning. It was only when the boss decided to walk to the gate that he saw the hat hanging there. The old, worn hat, a companion through many battles, the hat that João would never leave behind if he intended to return. Upon touching that object, Seu Afonso felt a strange impact, as if something pierced his chest. A heavy silence fell over him, and for the first time in years, the boss realized that perhaps he had lost something he couldn't replace. And you, the viewer, tell me honestly, doesn't it hurt to see someone pushed to their limit because of ingratitude? If this part of the story moved you, comment, "He didn't deserve this," or "Respect for the worker," because that helps this video reach more people who enjoy moving stories, true stories, stories that touch the heart. And stay with me, because what will happen after this breakup will still break a lot of people's hearts. Sure, let's continue exactly where we left off. You can send me the next topic you want to develop, or the name of the next part of the script, and I'll immediately start writing the next 5,000 characters, maintaining the same emotional tone, the same psychological depth, and the same narrative intensity. The silence that enveloped the farm after João Veredas's departure was no ordinary silence. It was a heavy, strange, almost frightening silence, as if someone had ripped the heart from its place, leaving only the lifeless body, struggling to function. In the early hours of the following day, everything began to unravel. The cattle seemed restless, wandering from one side to the other without João's firm and calm command. The ranch hands looked at each other, unsure where to begin, because even without understanding, everyone there followed a rhythm that the cowboy dictated naturally. He was the compass, the silent center that organized everything. The calves mooed louder, lost. The cows formed disjointed groups, as if they sensed that something or someone was missing. Even the horses seemed agitated, stamping their hooves impatiently. It was impressive how an absence could make so much noise, and every detail, every small lapse in control, accumulated as living proof of how essential João was in that corner of the world. The employees tried to stick to the routine, but everything seemed wrong. Tasks were delayed, the corral was a mess. Handling the cattle seemed more difficult, more confusing. It was as if everyone there was working with their hands tied. Some of the farmhands began to talk amongst themselves, exchanging worried glances, because they knew that João wasn't just another one. He was the man who knew every corner, every animal, every problem, even before it happened. He was that rare type of worker who can't be replaced, and now his absence was beginning to hurt. It wasn't until mid-morning that Seu Afonso, sitting on the porch, began to feel the strange sensation that something was out of place. It wasn't just the different movement on the farm, but an inner unease, a restlessness he couldn't name. The farm seemed lost, and the truth, even if he didn't want to admit it, was that this emptiness had a name. His name was John. He tried to follow his hard, rigid routine, as he always did, but it seemed that everything around him insisted on reminding him of the cowboy's absence. As he passed the corral and saw the cattle scattered, aimless, uneasy, he frowned. It was as if the animals were asking for Joam, as if they were waiting for his calm voice, his characteristic whistle, his firm way of pointing the way. And there, for the first time in a long time, a strange feeling pierced Afonso's chest, a pang of regret. He walked around the farm, trying to understand this unease. He went to the shed, saw tools out of place, tools that Joam always kept neatly aligned, clean, ready for use. He went to the pasture and saw the makeshift fence that the cowboy had probably repaired during the storm, without anyone knowing. The branches were still there, marked with mud, proving that someone had fought against the chaos while the whole farm slept. And it was at that moment that it started to sink in. That makeshift piece of wood, that fence built on sheer courage, revealed something he never wanted to see. Joam carried the farm on his shoulders, not by order, not by obligation, but out of love, out of character, out of a sense of duty that few men possess these days. The boss stood before that fence for long seconds, feeling breathless. It was as if, finally, a door had opened inside him, a door that led directly to his own shadow, that part of himself that Jung said we all avoid looking at. And there he was, the tough, proud, arrogant man, facing the weight of his own choices. The repetition of the routine, so mechanical until then, now seemed impossible. So Afonso passed by the corral again and got annoyed with the farmhands, but the truth is, he knew Joam would do it better. Joam did everything better, not because he was stronger, but because he was more dedicated. He was the one who woke up before everyone else, who went to bed last, who took care of the details that nobody believed were important. And now all of that was needed. Afternoon drew to a close, bringing with it an atmosphere of anguish that spread across the farm like fog. Afonso tried to avoid it, but his mind kept returning to the image of the hat hanging on the gate. That image was the clearest representation of everything he had ignored for so long. Joam was not just a cowboy, he was the beating heart of that place. He was the man who gave life to what the boss believed he controlled, and upon realizing this, a deep pain rose in Afonso's chest. A pain that mixed regret, guilt, fear, and a kind of silent grief that only those who finally understand what they have lost can feel. And you, who are following this story, tell me, isn't it sad to only realize what's happening when it's too late? If this touched your heart, comment, "He only realized it when he lost him," or "Someone's worth isn't discovered in their absence." These phrases greatly help the video reach more people who enjoy emotional and profound stories like this one. Stay with me, because the next part of this story will tug at your heartstrings even harder. When night fell again on the farm, bringing that warm wind that usually heralds calm, so Afonso realized there was no calm within himself. The absence of Joam Veredas, which at first seemed like just an inconvenience, was now becoming a growing void, tightening his chest, disturbing his thoughts, and revealing truths he had tried to hide for years. It was as if every corner of the farm whispered the cowboy's name. Every open gate, every saddle out of place, every restless animal seemed to demand from him a recognition that came too late. He walked slowly along the edge of the pasture, running his hand along the fence that Joam had reinforced with so much effort. That makeshift piece of wood, dirty with dried mud, was the visible proof of a silent love, of a commitment that no salary in the world could buy. And there, before that piece of fence, Afonso felt his eyes burn in a way he didn't remember feeling since he was young. Because it wasn't just a fence there. It was a mirror that showed him what he had lost. Not an employee, but a loyal, upright man, a rare quality. It was as if God had taken away from his life precisely what he had never known how to value. And it wasn't just about John. It was about everything he represented. silent delivery, true humility. Zeal that is not asked for, but is born from the heart. Deep down, João was the noble part of the world, the noble part of Afonso's own psyche, that he neglected, ignored, despised. If we were to look at it through the lens of depth psychology, especially Jungian psychology, João represented the self trying to guide, but which the proud ego refuses to listen to. He was the inner light, the one that many lose precisely because they consider themselves too self-sufficient. Afonso stopped near the old tree where João used to water the horse. He remembered how many times he had passed by without noticing anything, without realizing the care, without noticing the respectful way João treated the animals. Now, every detail seemed to scream. It seemed to say, "You didn't see, you didn't want to see." And that realization hit him like a hard blow. Guilt came as a weight, a burden he had never felt before. It was as if every harsh action, every bit of harsh word, every indifferent glance returned to collect its emotional debt. He walked a few more steps and found João's cell thrown in a corner, still damp from the rain, with signs of wear. Touching it, he felt a pang in his chest. Not because of the cell, but because of the history it carried, a history of struggle, of storms faced alone, of sleepless nights, of battles he never acknowledged. The farm was silent, but inside Afonso there was a deafening noise, the noise of an awakened conscience, a kind of pain that only arises when regret comes too late, when there is no longer any way to apologize, when there is no one left to listen. And there, alone in the dark, the boss finally understood something he should have realized years before. João had been a gift he wasted. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, softly illuminating the field, and Afonso, for the first time in a long time, felt a profound grief. It wasn't grief for physical death. It was grief for a broken relationship, for a lost opportunity, for a kindness he never acknowledged. He sat on the fallen log, ran a hand over his face, and murmured to himself, almost in a whisper, "Sometimes God takes away what we didn't know how to value." Those words echoed within him like a belated warning. And perhaps that's exactly what this story wants to show the viewer, that time waits for no one, that rare people pass through our lives without fanfare, without noise, and if we don't pay attention, we miss them. We missed the chance to say thank you. We missed the chance to care. We lost the chance to love. And when we open our eyes, all that remains is regret, that heavy companion that never arrives beforehand, only afterward. João represented everything Afonso needed to see within himself, but never had the courage to look at. It was the noble side, the human side, the luminous side that arrogance had stifled. And now, when the farm seemed empty, when the cattle seemed soulless, when the days seemed too long, he finally understood that it wasn't João he was missing. That was what John awakened, and that emptiness, nothing in the world can fill it. And before we move on to the next part of this story, answer me in the comments. Comment, "Appreciate before it's too late," if this reflection resonated with you. Or comment, "I learned my lesson, so I know that this message reached where it needed to reach." This greatly helps the video reach more people who need to hear moving and profound stories like this one.